He thought it ended with a signature. Mine on a termination slip slid across polished glass. He smiled, confident that paperwork could erase what he did not understand. But there are kinds of power that do not raise their voice, and kinds of vengeance that do not need to shout. I walked out of that office quietly, placed one letter in the mail and waited. When the consequences arrived, they did not knock. They simply unfolded, calm, precise, and irreversible. People notice the applause. They do not notice the scaffolding. A stapled audit packet sits on my desk like a small, stubborn monument. The brass nameplate reads Evelyn Hart, Risk and Compliance. The letters are worn where a hand once hovered in thought. A coffee mug, half full and warm to the touch, catches the light from the window and throws a thin rectangle of day across a rubber band and a stack of vendor certificates. The office hums with ordinary electricity, keyboards, distant laughter, the soft click of a high heel down a tile corridor. It is the sound of things that have not yet fallen apart. I keep the scaffolding orderly, because someone must. I walk the repository of vendor attestations like a librarian walks the stacks. My calendar is a sequence of obligations, each date a small pulse. Yearly recertifications, mandatory trainings, the insurance renewal that reads in bold red on my desktop calendar. 27 days. I tell myself that this is not glamour. It is not recognition. It is very plainly necessary. Arcadia Systems is the kind of company that writes mission statements on glass and then forgets to bolt the doors. We sell a clean, optimistic product, and we sell a story about growth. Rebecca Ames, our Chief Executive Officer, is both ambitious and rational. She knows how to sell a roadmap and when to cut expenses. Greg Torres in finance knows only runway. Legal keeps a careful, low voice in the background, like an instrument tuned to the key of caution. All of them need the scaffolding as much as I do. Most of them do not know they need it. They know Derek Shaw. He arrives on a Tuesday that smells faintly of expensive cologne and new business cards. He steps into the open floor with the easy confidence of a man who has rehearsed every entrance. He renames departments with the care of someone rearranging furniture he cannot afford. In the first week, he hosts a town hall with slides so glossy the light bounces off them like confetti. He uses words like momentum and synergy as if invocation will manufacture results. Derek is not a monster. He is practiced. In the bathroom later that morning, I catch him adjusting his handshake in the mirror, practicing the friendly squeeze, rehearsing the smile. That private moment makes him more human, and therefore more dangerous. Charm is a tool. Performance can be persuasive. Owen Reed is the consultant he brings in. Owen smells like optimism and fresh coffee. He brings a small dog to the office named Newton, who wears a bandana with a cartoon lock on it. Newton sits politely under Owen's chair, while Owen fills a Slack channel with templates and upbeat gifs. He means well. He lacks the credentials, but he has enthusiasm. And enthusiasm is a currency in a room desperate for motion. On the morning Derek introduces Owen formally, I ask a simple question in a meeting that has been edited to look like progress. Do you have SOC2 or ISO verification for the tools you propose to integrate? The room pauses to look at the 5-slide mantra Derek has prepared. Owen smiles in the way that people smile when they are confident someone else will translate their enthusiasm into work. He deflects with a promise, we will standardize it. We will automate compliance. Derek claps once, as if the clap will close the conversation. Later, someone in the back of the room calls me paranoid. Derek uses the word like a dismissal. It lands in the air and expands, tagging itself to everything I say after that. Human Resources makes a note. The polite phrase, we have received concerns about your communication style, arrives in my calendar as a meeting invite. I look at it and feel the small heat of humiliation that comes not from accusation, but from being underestimated. There is a photograph on my desk. It is of a younger woman with a crooked smile, holding a small child who is clearly proud of a crayon drawing. A potted plant leans toward the light. They are ordinary things. They are the private scaffolding that keeps me steady. When I close my eyes that night after the HR invite appears, one tear falls without permission. It is not a breakdown. It is a fissure, small and honest. That tells me I am human, and that sometimes being precise is lonely. The underwriter at Everguard sends a message that reads plainly, please confirm any third-party access to vendor controls. The days in my calendar shrink, 19. The number sits in the corner of my screen like a metronome. I do not tell anyone that numbers make me careful. I do not have to. The work is visible in the gaps between meetings. A vendor certification that is 2 months out of date, a multi-factor authentication agreement I alone remember renewing last year, a checklist that goes deeper than the rhetoric on a whiteboard. Derek paces in front of a conference glass, practicing a line about agility. He smiles broadly when a board member praises his vision. In private, though, he flinches when someone asks specifics about a vendor audit. Owen, bless him, fumbles through our shared drive with the kind of confusion that is not theatrical, but earnest. Monique in HR lingers in the doorway of my office one afternoon, fingers twisting the edge of a manila folder, and says quietly that they are trying to create space for new strategy. Her voice carries apology even when the words are corporate. When HR finally sits me down, it is with rehearsed empathy. 2 representatives, polite and nervous, ask scripted questions that do not map to the reality of my work. They tell me that my role will be repositioned in the interest of organizational agility. They say this as if agility were a kind of kindness. They use the phrase, support the transition, and then fold it into an offer to help me hand over documentation. There is no real handover to offer, because the history of our controls lives in context as much as in files. I do not argue. I do not make a scene. I rise, collect my badge, and walk down the corridor that now smells of lemon cleaning fluid and new carpet. On my way out, I pass Owen at my desk, leaning over my keyboard with Newton's tale a pendulum behind him. He looks up startled and offers an apologetic smile that is more sheepish than malicious. Derek is already in his element, talking about pilots and velocity, and how we will be future-ready. At home, the rain begins in thin, polite streaks. The manila envelope on my coffee table is blank on the outside. I slide the single sentence I have written inside. Notice of termination of role and cessation of authority as named assessor. It is terse because clarity is its own kindness. I seal it, feel the weight of paper in my hand, and place the envelope in my bag. I do not raise a fist. I do not shout. I step into the rain and walk to the mailbox 2 blocks away. The sound of the envelope dropping into the slot is a soft final click, like the closing of a door. It is not loud. It does not need to be. You do not have to shout to burn down a circus. The rain comes down harder, and I walk home under it, the scaffolding still in place in my mind, ready to hold whatever comes next. The office does not collapse with the sound of a drum. It unravels like a seam left unattended, tiny pulls that widen under pressure until the cloth gives way. For 2 days after the envelope slid into the mailbox, Arcadia wore the same glossy face. Derek Shaw gave another town hall. Owen Reed posted a celebratory image of a new dashboard. Rebecca Ames answered investor queries with a practiced calm. The hum continued. The scaffolding remained in place, at least to those who looked only at the surface. Behind the surface, things began to go quiet and strange. A vendor flag that had always risen on Evelyn Hart's screen did not rise. An automated report spat out a list with blank signature fields where her name had once lived. A notification about expiring credentials landed in a junior analyst's inbox, with a date stamped red and no one assigned to act. These were small bureaucratic misfires. They were also the precise places where systems expect people to live and breathe. Evelyn watched the slow deterioration as a scientist watches an experiment change course. She received the first alert on her personal phone, an automated forward vendor renewal overdue. She read it on a park bench between errands, the letter she had mailed still warm in the memory of her hands. The impulse to act rose in her, as it had always risen when a checkbox went unchecked. She set the phone down. The restraint was not a moral failing. It was a decision. In the quiet of a cafe, she remembered a former analyst named Priya, a bright woman Evelyn had mentored. Evelyn had taught her how to read a certificate, how to map dependencies, how to think in timelines. Priya had left for a role in another city, grateful and competent. Evelyn had not done what she had done for applause. She had done it because a system without care is a gift to catastrophe. She sat with options like cards on a table. One path was spectacle, an immediate public alarm, a viral post, a march to the boardroom with evidence in hand. The other path was quieter, formal and surgical. She chose the latter. She had always believed in process. It was not blandness. It was leverage. 2 days after the envelope dropped, Everguard Indemnity's internal process triggered as designed. Their system, trained to detect changes to named assessors and to require formal reassignment, logged an anomaly. The named assessor on Arcadia's policy was inactive, and no replacement had been acknowledged. The alert moved up the chain until it reached a voice that had once told her, in a different tone, that her attention to detail had kept their mutual work afloat. At Arcadia, the first outward sign that anything was wrong was banal, a calendar update that turned into panic. Legal forwarded a terse note to senior staff, requesting an immediate governance review. Investors received a soft query. The roadmap meeting that Derek had planned as a triumphant showpiece became, in minutes, the most dangerous room in the building. Derek paced as if he could walk away the problem. He began his presentation with confidence, clicking through slides that glowed with metrics and aspiration. The dashboard shone. He spoke of alignment and acceleration. The board nodded. Rebecca gave the approving look of a captain who expected her crew to stay the course. Michael Pierce from Everguard sat at the end of the long table like a man who had learned to speak quietly and be heard. He listened without haste. When he spoke, his voice carried no triumph. He asked the single question that did not care for rhetoric. Who authorized the termination of the named assessor recorded on the policy? There was a long human silence. Derek blinked. He fumbled for papers. For a moment he attempted to smile, and then found he had no muscles left for acting. He had told himself that energy could substitute for process. He had believed in velocity. Now those beliefs met the exacting grammar of formal requirements. Owen's face betrayed him. He had meant to be helpful. He had believed the dashboard and the templates. Now he realized he had accepted fragments in place of foundation. He sat with his dog Newton at his feet, his hands folded, and the expression of someone who had just learned the cost of good intentions. Monique from Human Resources watched the exchange with her hand pressed to her mouth. She had signed forms she believed to be procedural mere paperwork to make a transition easy. She had not read the clause that required a 30-day notice to the underwriter for changes to a named assessor. Her eyes glistened with a mixture of shame and fear. Michael Pierce unfolded a sheet and read the clause aloud, not as an accusation, but as arithmetic. No formal reassignment, no acknowledgement by the insurer, retroactive suspension of coverage. The words landed like a weight. The boardroom emptied of its easy conversation and filled with a dense communal breath. The CEO's jaw tightened. A one-word message lit her phone, and she stared at it as if it were a wound. Evelyn sat at her kitchen table when the first messages appeared. A friend sent her a screenshot of the boardroom, a line of text, "We are on fire." Her phone buzzed until the vibration blurred into a steady drone. There was no glee in the images she received, only a string of stunned faces and the same stunned question. How had they missed this? Her inbox filled with curiosity she did not owe. Colleagues she had not heard from in months texted with thinly veiled regret. One junior analyst sent a single message, "We did not understand what we lost." Monique called. Her voice was small and urgent and real. "Evelyn, I am so sorry," she said. "I never realized. I did not know the clause. Relief and reproach are messy friends." Evelyn did not answer. Back in the boardroom, Derek tried, voice cracking, to explain a chain of decisions that now looked less like leadership and more like improvisation. He spoke of pilots and speed. He said the word alignment until it became brittle. Rebecca held her face steady, but the color had drained from it. The room split into those who wanted to fix the problem immediately and those who wanted to hide the failure until someone else made it someone else's concern. Michael closed his file slowly. "Coverage is suspended retroactively to the date the named assessor was removed," he said. The sentence was not loud, but it had the force of a final order. The CEO called for an emergency recess. Phones vibrated. A whispered network began to message, to call, to triage. Evelyn watched the messages arrive and did not move at first. The quiet she had chosen to wield now had consequences that fell like rain on a city. She felt a ripple of something she had expected, and yet had not wished for. Confirmation that she had been right about the scaffolding. She also felt the burden of those who would now suffer for omissions they did not intend. Her voicemail lit up with a single, Unfamiliar pattern of urgency. Rebecca Ames, CEO. The missed call sat on her screen like a challenge. She let it ring. The recording would wait. The conversation would wait. There was no satisfaction in the silence, only the sober knowledge that systems demand custodians. The world had noticed the scaffolding, but it had been noticed by the wrong people and for the wrong reasons. She stared at the message until the circle on her screen stopped pulsing. The camera might cut to black then, but the room inside her remained lit with the small, relentless working of consequence. The emergency calls began before dawn. Phones that had sat silent overnight lit up with the same urgent pattern. Legal, investors, clients. In the morning light, Arcadia felt like a ship with a hole below the waterline. People moved with purpose that had the brittle edge of fear. Conference rooms filled with counsel and consultants. Whiteboards that had been full of ambition now displayed lists of damage control tasks, remediation, notification, audit. The roadmap had become a triage plan. Evelyn Hart watched the scramble through a window in a consulting room where she had agreed to meet once the initial panic had cooled. She had been offered reinstatement the previous evening. Rebecca Ames had called, voice steady but thin, and had asked if Evelyn would come in to discuss options. The offer on the table was immediate and generous. Restored title, salary, and a promise of autonomy. It came with apologies rehearsed into a cadence that sought to bridge error. She had read the email twice and left it unread on her phone for hours. When she finally opened her calendar and accepted a tentative slot, it was with the intention to negotiate more than to forgive. There was a cost to the course she had set in motion. Evelyn had seen it in the faces of a junior team member whose internship was now uncertain, in the client pilot that stalled when the insurer froze coverage, and in the way the chief financial officer looked at projections as if they were suddenly fragile artifacts. She did not celebrate the company's pain. She had not engineered collapse to delight in it. The nights after she mailed the envelope had been sleepless, the kind of sleeplessness that asks questions about ethics and consequence. At 3:00 in the morning, she had reread old emails, each line a reminder that every checkbox had a human reason behind it. Regret in her case was not about being right. It was about the weight of being correct at the cost of others' uncertainty. Her counsel arrived with her to the meeting. They sat at a long table beneath the same glass wall through which, 2 days before, Derek had paced and rehearsed catchphrases. Rebecca entered with Michael Pierce from Evergard at her side. Michael carried the steady quiet of someone who had sat in many rooms where procedure outlived optimism. He had come not to gloat, but to ensure next steps would be lawful and enforceable. The negotiation was precise, almost surgical. Evelyn did not demand retribution. She asked for safeguards. She requested written indemnities that would protect her from personal liability for actions taken in good faith while serving as the named assessor. She asked for explicit authority over vendor approvals and over the process for designating any replacement assessor. She sought governance changes to ensure that any future reassignment would include insurer notification and a 30-day notice period. Finally, she asked for independence, to consult under terms that removed her from direct internal direction while preserving her authority to certify and to rescind certifications if controls were inadequate. Rebecca listened, her fingers interlaced on the table. She offered honest apology and an emendation of corporate process. She proposed an immediate reinstatement with reporting lines adjusted to grant Evelyn the authority she requested. The offer also included stock options and a budget to rebuild the vendor governance framework. Rebecca's voice held fatigue and a clarity that felt like contrition transformed into action. Derek did not enter the room at first. When he did, he came alone, with no entourage and no script. He stopped at the doorway, hands slightly trembling, and offered a simple, direct apology that carried more remorse than any public performance could have. He did not explain away decisions. He listened. For someone who had spent a week speaking in slogans, the act of listening was a new and difficult thing. Owen sent a brief message from his desk. "I am sorry." Evelyn read it and put the phone down. She acknowledged the sentiment with a small, weary nod. There was no theatrics. There was instead human accounting, recognition of error, and the tentative work of repair. Michael Pierce remained at the table as moderator. Evergard required evidence of remediation and a formal acceptance of Evelyn's role as the named assessor under an independent consulting contract. The insurer made clear that coverage could be reinstated only after the underwriters reviewed an updated governance plan and a signed appointment that met policy requirements. Those conditions were exact but attainable. Over the course of one long morning, they drafted terms that satisfied legal counsel and underwriter, and that granted Evelyn the protections she had requested. When the ink dried and the signatures fell into place, coverage was not instantly restored, nor was the company unscarred. Investors agreed to resume negotiations contingent on third-party audits. Client pilots would recommence under oversight and with additional reporting. The pipeline resumed, but with delays and with the sober knowledge that reputations could not be rebuilt overnight. The company had been spared catastrophic collapse by a combination of timely process and personal accountability. Yet it had paid a price. Time lost, trust diminished, and internal culture changed. Evelyn signed a contract that named her Langford Advisory as the independent firm that would serve as Arcadia's named assessor of record. She accepted a modest equity grant and a consulting retainer. When she stood and closed the binder with the new agreement, the motion was small and deliberate. There were no triumphant gestures. The victory felt less like conquest and more like a recalibration of obligations and expectations. The weeks that followed were not dramatic in public, but were thorough in practice. Evelyn led a remediation program that rewrote onboarding protocols, instituted mandatory vendor rechecks, and required dual sign-offs for any change to certifications. She mentored a new analyst with the same patience she had once shown to Priya. Monique, from Human Resources, initiated a reconciliation plan that included training and a forum for staff to ask difficult questions without fear. Derek accepted reassignment to an operations role under a governance council that contained clear checks. Owen found a position at a smaller firm where he could learn the craft he had rushed to imitate. The company learned clumsily and then more steadily to respect the scaffolding it had once overlooked. On the day Evelyn planted a young tree outside her apartment, she felt the ground resist the shovel and then give. The small green shoot was a slow, patient thing. It would not prove anything by morning. It would require tending and seasons. That suited her. She did not gloat. She negotiated protections that would prevent future erasure of institutional knowledge. She accepted fees and terms because she understood that expertise carries value and responsibility. Power, she knew, is not the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it is the name on a form, but a name without accountability is nothing. The boardroom had learned painfully that systems rely on people who remember and who insist on being heard. At dusk, she stood before the glass of the boardroom and watched the last meeting of that day. Rebecca, Michael Pierce, and a small group reviewing the revised governance model. The city beyond the glass glowed in the falling light. Evelyn closed the binder with a soft thud and stepped away. Her hand brushed the leash of a dog as she passed in the lobby, and she smiled, slight and private. She walked into the evening with the binder under her arm and the new tree at the back of her mind. Power is not the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it is the name on the form. There is a particular quiet that follows consequence. It is not the brittle silence of victory or the thin cheer of a crowd. It is the tempered hush that arrives when a thing that should have held has been found wanting, and the people who relied upon it begin, quietly and urgently, to put their hands to the work of repair. That hush is the last line of the story I was handed, and the first line of the life I chose afterward. If there is a single lesson that lives at the center of this story, it is that authority without accountability is a fragile thing. Flashy speeches, clever dashboards, and confidence may move a crowd for a while. They do not, however, replace the slow, patient labor of stewardship. The forms that sit on a desk, the single line of a signature, the clause buried in policy language, these are not ceremonial artifacts. They are the architecture of trust. When the architecture is neglected, everything it supports becomes precarious. Another lesson is quieter and perhaps harder to accept. Power is often mistaken for presence. People applaud the person who speaks the loudest. They rarely see the person who arrives before dawn and leaves after midnight, making sure the lights will still work when the applause dies. There is dignity in being the person who tends the scaffolding. There is responsibility in recognizing that quiet competence can save more than pride ever could. This is not, however, a call to wield process as a weapon for spite. The aim was never to humiliate. The aim was to remind a community that systems need custodians, and that the cost of ignoring them is collective. There is a difference between retribution and restoration. The story ends not with a single triumphant shout, but with agreements, governance, and the slow, stubborn work of rebuilding. If this story touched something in you, an old indignation, a recognition of the quiet work you do, or a question about how institutions hold together, I would like to hear about it. Share a moment when attention to detail saved something in your world, or a time when you watched the scaffolding fall. Leave a comment so we can speak frankly about what real stewardship looks like. If you value stories that look beyond drama to the mechanics of responsibility, consider subscribing. There are more quiet reckonings to tell, and more small exact actions that change outcomes in ways applause never can. Thank you for listening. If nothing else, remember this: the most potent power is not the loudest voice in the room. It is the steady hand that signs the line when it matters most.